Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. You able to hear? My privilege is in welcoming Honorable Minister Shri Santosh Kumar Gangwarji, Minister of State for Finance, who plays a pivotal role in finance and infrastructure finance, and Ms. Motena Solo, Chief Executive, Economic Policy and Temporary Alternative Governor, Government of Lesotho, Shri Gupta ji, Chairman and Managing Director of APCOS, Mr. James Sanfa Koroma, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Union Trust Bank, Mr. Ramchand, Karunakaran Ramchand, the CEO of ILFS Infrastructure Development Corporation, and I am Kuppuswamy, representing the Shapurji Palanji Group. Sir, welcome to this meet on infrastructure for Africa. It has almost become a cliche to say that infrastructure is the sine qua non for development. We keep saying it year after year that Africa's infrastructure development requirements are $93 billion per year. No statistics are as yet available on how much of it has been bridged. The gap is so huge that it would take probably a decade or more to bridge it. And therefore the scope for India is phenomenal. So also is the scope for the private sector and for the public-private partnership programs, which entail a lot of investment. It's yet again a cliche to say that Africa's growth could be at least 40% better if the roads are paved, if power is available everywhere, if the railway network links up all the producers of ores to the ports or the processors. All that is given, infrastructure would definitely facilitate growth to speed up by at least 40%, they say. Considering that the mining mineral potential of Africa is second to none, the need for infrastructure also is second to none as far as Africa goes. I would only state that today 6 of the fastest growing nations in the world are in Africa. You can very well imagine if infrastructure growth were there, how much better that could be. At the same time, 7 of the most unequal economies are also housed in Africa. That itself poses a threat to democracy. Although in the recent past, African nations have established themselves as good learners in democracy and have a lesson or two to teach us also. Given this background, this session on infrastructure development for Africa and what India and other African Development Bank and other institutions can do to spur it up is of vital importance. I first request Mr. Karunakaran Ramchand, CEO of ILFS Infrastructure Development Corporation, which has been pioneering PPP projects in India, to share his views on this.
Thank you, Mr. Kuppuswamy, Honorable Minister, Excellencies, dignitaries on the dais, friends, colleagues, and lot of familiar faces. I don't think there is a a guru as far as PPP is concerned. I think we are all students in the PPP market. Uh, we are all students in some in kindergarten and some in probably second or third standard. Like Mr. Kuppuswamy said, and I have some personal experience of having begun the PPP offshoot for the company I represent in this state. We started a small toll road. It was 32 kilometers. It was a place called Baroda. Followed with another toll road close to where we are sitting, from Ahmedabad to Mehsana, which was 55 kilometers. And they were completed almost 17 years ago. And you can well imagine the difficulties that we had in not only drawing up a contract for enabling PPPs, but also in trying to get the banking sector to get interested in the PPP framework. Having said that, I think the country took on PPP on a fairly significant and a method that they wanted to implement infrastructure in. Over the past probably 15, 17 years, we have very close to something like 3,000 projects that have either been done or are under implementation on a PPP framework. So if you look at the PPP market in India, I think that's definitely something that the African continent can pick up, learn from the mistakes that we have committed, and leapfrog into a more successful enterprise attracting investment for infrastructure. As is the want everywhere else, I think the easiest to implement is the transport sector, or in particular the road sector. The road sector does not have too much of a user pay issue which arises with many other infrastructure sectors. The only other sector that you can probably get over the initial user pay issues that come up with implementing PPP is probably telecom and electricity. And I think both of these have been fairly successfully implemented in the initial phases. As you go down the value chain and get into sectors like water, sewage, effluent treatment, urban transport, or urban infrastructure, I think that's where most of the difficulties come in when you start looking at PPPs and looking at projects to actually be funded through a PPP framework. The experience in India has been mixed. We started off with a very conducive framework for PPPs. The market, because of the conducive nature, attracted a lot of players. And a lot of players entered this sector thinking that the construction contract was the main basis of undertaking a PPP, while it was actually the revenue stream which is more important, and the risk allocation which one undertakes when you have to do these projects. I think we got into a stumble somewhere in 2011, 2012. We are reviving the market again. There are a lot of issues with the banking sector as far as the PPP is concerned in India today, and the government of India has actually pushed forward a very large construction-based implementation of infrastructure now. We have some experience of working in the African continent. I can't say, I'm sure there are many other Indian companies who have far better experience of working in the African continent. We are doing some work in Botswana, which is basically on road repair and maintenance over a long period of time. We're also doing similar works in Ethiopia. And we're also trying to do something in Senegal, and we did make a foray into Nigeria some time back. So we are interested in looking at African continent. We're looking at it in two ways. We have actually set up what is called a project development company in partnership with Exim Bank, State Bank of India, and the African Development Bank. The idea of this company is to take on projects from government, make them viable, and actually put them out into the market for bidding. and therefore be able to attract private sector investment into projects. This company is called Kukuza Project Development Company. It's in the process of being set up. I think the CEO will be appointed very soon. It will be based in Mauritius, and it will be available for all African countries to access to actually get the project development done, and to therefore actually come up with projects which can be bankable and which can be put out into the market. I think that's the most important part when you start this exercise. I don't think we have a big bang approach when it comes to doing PPP projects. I think it starts slow, but it builds up momentum very quickly. A lot of investors and bankers get interested and will be actually able to take huge amount of risks as the projects progress. I think there is acceptance of the Kukuza principle in Africa, and we are more than willing to work with many companies or governments in Africa to move this framework forward. I wish to thank the people who have given me an opportunity to speak here. I welcome you to India, and I think if you have an opportunity, you should go across to Gandhinagar. We are building a new city. It's called GIFT. It's a state-of-art infrastructure that's being built in Gandhinagar. It's the only SEZ which is financial in nature. Honorable Minister has been supporting us in trying to get that off the ground as quickly as possible, and I think that's something that there are a lot of lessons to be learnt in that, and we can actually implement a few of them across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramchand. It was a frank admission that Africa can learn from India's experiences, both the good and bad ones, so that you can avoid the mistakes and do the good part of it. Particularly ILFS's experience in the road sector, in the PPP part of it, has been phenomenal here. They've been trendsetters, and you would certainly do well to learn from what he has taught. May I now request Mr. R.K. Gupta, Chairman and Managing Director of APCOS, a consultancy organization which is also into execution these days, to share his experience. Please.
I will request Mr. Amit to support me on this. Honorable Minister of State for Finance, Shri Santosh Kumar Gangwal ji, Government of India. Honorable panelists on the podium, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today it is my honor to greet fellow African brothers and sisters and thank our esteemed guests from the great continent that sparked the transformation of my nation through the thoughts and deeds of Mahatma Gandhi, our great leader who discovered his true calling in life on African soil. We are fortunate and blessed with an opportunity to rediscover and reinvent ourselves as we are gathered on the very soil of Gujarat, the birthplace of the great Mahatma. Once again, through our deliberations, sharing of experiences, our success stories on partnering for growth and development, together we are adding momentum to the spinning charkha, that is the wheel of ever-increasing infrastructure for the benefit of mankind. We have witnessed with joy and the rapid rise and growth of Africa in the past decade. Despite a tough global economic environment, the growth of several African economies is amongst the highest in the world. The recent growth experience in Africa has been widespread and not limited to countries only with abundant natural resources or geographical advantages. The need of the hour is to accelerate and sustain this growth pattern over time. If current projections are accurate, I understand that by 2050, Africa will have roughly the same population as China and India put together. This would open up the doors to greater opportunities and fulfilling the aspirations of nearly 1 billion ambitious, hardworking young people. India, like Africa, is rich in its diversity and vibrancy. We share similar landscape, colonial history, and comparable economic and demographic challenges. This paves the way for India and Africa to work well together as natural partners for mutual benefit, and indeed we have. Our cooperation to date has been commendable and outstanding. The rapid, unmatched acceleration of my country's development infrastructure in the recent past is not accidental. It is due to the vision of the government led by Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji. It is indeed the fruit of well thought out, meticulously planned, stringently pursued, methodically executed development policies and concrete schemes. India has traversed through an era of steam engines to the bullet train, from radio station to space station, from the postcard to the SARC satellite, and subsistence farming to world-class agro-industries. What inspires me to mention this, that as a strong adherent to South-South cooperation, India is willing to partner similar infrastructure cycles with Africa as well. Honorable Prime Minister's vision of transforming our country through major welfare schemes and development initiatives intends to provide the best infrastructure for the citizens of this country. The schemes are dedicated, developing citizen-friendly smart cities, upgrading infrastructure, housing for all, electrification of rural India, river rejuvenation, irrigation and agricultural development, encouraging in-house manufacturing, and unlocking of indigenous entrepreneurial skills. The experiences from these schemes may hold some valuable lessons for Africa's infrastructure development. With the noble vision of nurturing the infrastructure development potential in Africa, the Honorable Prime Minister of India has committed an additional line of credit of $10 billion over the next 5 years. Now it is the apt time to take stock to ensure that these investments across the identified 5 priority areas known as high fives, with the dream of transforming a vibrant Africa, yields results by the next decade in the most efficiently and timely manner. Africa is in the verge of becoming the second largest market for investments. Africa has huge water resources potential with more than 50 water basins which predominantly remain untapped. On the power front, only 4.3% of the potential has been harnessed so far. Only 10% of the total arable land is under cultivation. With this immense potential not fully exploited, and in recognition of the fact that Africa is a land of emerging opportunities, India is committed to be the key partner in the shared journey of development by fulfilling the objectives of African high fives. WAPCO is a public sector enterprise of the Government of India under the Ministry of Water Resources, River Development and Ganga Rejuvenation, which I represent, is tirelessly working on nation-building schemes not only in India but abroad as well. WAPCOs as a global leader have executed wide-ranging assignments in more than 55 countries in Africa and Asia. We derive this confidence having successfully completed more than 900 projects in irrigation, water resources, flood control, groundwater, agriculture, water supply and sanitation, rural and urban development, roads and highways, ports and inland navigation, power and transmission, etc. All these facets of infrastructure shall constitute the building links for a sustainable future worldwide. The successful execution of projects in Africa necessitates master plans for sectoral development, bankable data project reports, tender engineering, construction supervision, project management, commissioning and capacity building. WAPCOs is uniquely placed and eligible to be your reliable partner from concept to commissioning. We have established ourselves as a brand for quality assurance through meticulously and stringent project management of internationally renowned EPC contractors working in Africa. Our experts have proved their engineering capabilities by rendering their best quality control skills during project implementation through quality assurance works, during shop testing and material procurement in Germany, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Austria, Denmark, Japan, China, France, and Netherlands for ensuring smooth quality of works in various ongoing projects in Africa. It has been rightly said, you and I travel by road and rail, but countries travel on infrastructure. We are thankful to all those nations who have given us an opportunity to be their fellow partner in journey for development. Though not located in Africa, it may be pertinent to mention the Afghan-India Friendship Dam in Afghanistan, which was completed by WAPCOs on a turnkey basis and jointly inaugurated by the Honorable Prime Minister of India and His Excellency the President of Afghanistan in June last year. Despite the enormous security threat to its personnel, severe logistical challenges, tough terrain, lack of infrastructure and vagaries of nature, this multi-purpose project brought joy and prosperity to thousands of people in this remote corner of the country. In the ultimate analysis, that is what matters to us the most. We look forward to working in the similar spirit, and all our African friends assure you of our determination to deliver at all costs, above profits and margins. India has continuously expanded its partnership with Africa. It rests on all our shoulders to ensure that this fine tradition endures through multifaceted projects as showpieces of the development partnership between India and Africa. It is my privilege to invite all of you to visit the WAPCO stall, where we have tried to showcase the best of our company with an aim to explore future potential through our combined efforts. Please do visit, question us, validate for yourself, pose challenges, suggest and tender your feedback for partnering future ties. Last but not the least, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to the organizers of this event for providing such a wide platform for sharing experiences on infrastructure development to strengthen Africa-India partnership. Thank you. Dhanyawad. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gupta ji. WAPCO's work, particularly in Afghanistan, has been phenomenal. And I think they have a few things to give to Africa, which Africa would do well to exploit. May I now request Ms. Motena Solo, Chief Executive, Economic Policy and Temporary Alternative Governor, Government of Lesotho, to give her address, please.
Thank you very much, and I thank you for giving me this privilege to be here talking to us. I was a little bit worried how I'm supposed to define Africa-India cooperation, whether it would be in the context of Lesotho or Africa as a whole, and I'm glad that that task has been done for me. So I will focus more on what I believe would be the opportunities for Africa-India cooperation as far as Lesotho is concerned. Lesotho is a small landlocked country which, according to the international classification, is a lower middle income country. But for all intents and purposes, and in so far as actual development is concerned, it is still classified as a least developed country under the UN classification. This means that there is a huge development deficit in Lesotho, which would necessarily have to be closed through a number of initiatives which can benefit from the cooperation with our friends, such as India. We have heard about the triple Ps. I think when we talk triple Ps, we talk a potential for private sector involvement in the development of a country. It is an attractive concept when a country is faced with financial difficulties, because the expectation is that the financing will be given by somebody else who is the private partner. The danger is that it also creates some kind of a burden on the country that is receiving, unless we are able to deal with the cost recovery as such. So for those projects which are able to recover their costs, I think PPPs are a good way to go, and Lesotho would definitely benefit from such, especially given that in infrastructure development, especially roads, we have a difficulty in that the terrain of Lesotho is very, very hilly and mountainous. To construct one road in Lesotho would probably cost 3 times an average cost in a flat country. So the involvement of the private sector is particularly attractive, given that we cannot source so much money from our development partners to put up the road infrastructure. So that's one area where we believe we could cooperate with India. The second area, of course, we all know that Lesotho is renowned for its waters. We are actually a country with a lot of water, which unfortunately remains very least harnessed. We have the Highlands Water Project, which generated water for export to South Africa. We still have a potential there, which can be tapped through other means other than the Highlands Water Project, although the Highlands Water Project is also a way in which we can enter that area. We are now going into the second phase of the project that will involve both transmission of water as well as hydroelectric power generation. So we have two potential areas there, although for Lesotho, in this partnership between Lesotho and South Africa, the most important would be the hydropower generation. So in that respect, therefore, we see a potential for cooperation as well. Energy as a whole, we have a lot of wind. There are areas that are particularly known to be able or have been tested to be able to generate wind power, as well as solar power. There are areas that are remote that are not accessible through the normal electrification grid that we know. And so hydropower, solar power and wind power in these areas would be particularly important, given that it is actually very costly to put up a grid in those very remote mountainous areas. So energy is another factor, or an area where we could actually explore with India some form of cooperation. The last, which is maybe the most important for this meeting or for this annual meetings, which is agriculture. The theme for this annual meetings is agriculture, and agriculture remains a key area for any development in any country. Any industrial development would necessarily have to start with some form of agricultural production. Lesotho, as I said, is a very mountainous country. It has very little arable land, but on top of that, the arable land is also dependent on rainfall. With the current global climate change, we know that we are also prone to cyclical droughts that affect our agricultural production. With the amount of water that we have, there should be no reason why we cannot explore irrigated agriculture or develop irrigated agriculture in Lesotho. The only way we would want to commercialize agriculture is if we ensure that there is continuous availability of water for irrigation, and the infrastructure for irrigation is a necessity for agricultural development in Lesotho. So that is another area where I believe we can actually cooperate with India. We have, I think, tried in the last 2-3 years, tried to talk about integrated development, meaning development that takes into account all of these areas that have a potential to grow the economy, or at least to stimulate growth. And the last one, I had said the last, but I just realized that the last one would be communications. In any country, development or growth must be accompanied by development of the communication sector. Lesotho tries to the extent possible to connect everybody, but there is a lot. It is still very expensive to for instance, to have IT connectivity in all the areas or the whole country. There are certain areas which are not at all covered by the internet network that we have. Yet we know that business and actually growth in entrepreneurship depends on how quick one can actually communicate with the next person. So communication is an IT connectivity is another area where I believe we should explore cooperation with India. We have had in the past support coming through the government of India, which unfortunately in some instances has not been very fruitful. And so I think in the future collaboration, we might have to really look and see how best we can cooperate and collaborate such that the results of such collaboration are seen on the ground. I believe I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Solo. You had touched upon the hilly terrain of Lesotho and the necessity for hydropower. It might interest you to know that a lot of our northern areas and the western areas are full of hills, and the Indian Railways and several Indian companies have set up infrastructure in those areas. The Indian companies have tremendous experience in that. Jammu-Udhampur Road, which my own company has been engaged in, is in a very hilly terrain. Konkan Railway Corporation, which is in the western, drilling through mountains, has been one of the pioneering efforts in India. These are possibly areas you might benefit from. And there are Indian companies which are very interested in hydropower, and they have been taking up hydropower projects not just in the neighboring nations, but also in Africa. Probably they would be interested. I think, you will have quite a few people lining up to meet you after this to exploit the potential that is there in Lesotho. Thank you very much. Who can understand infrastructure better than a financier? Mr. James Samfa Koroma, Founder Chief Executive Officer of Union Trust Bank Limited from Sierra Leone, another country with great mineral potential, is here to tell us his viewpoints.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I want to express my delight in being here. This is an opportunity I have looked for a long time. This is my third visit to India, and I have always been very moved by the stage of development, given the number of people in this country and given the opportunities here. But before I make my brief remarks, let me make a correction. In the script there, they said the government of Sierra Leone under my name. I am not running away from my government, only that I have a Minister of Finance here and other people. Most of my life I've spent in government as a chief economist in the Ministry of Finance for over 10 years and as governor of the central bank. But right for the last 20 years, I have been in the private sector. And my bank, Union Trust Bank, which I established in 1995, is the only indigenous private bank in Sierra Leone. Only indigenous private bank in Sierra Leone. So I'm delighted to be here. And I'll give you just a few experiences where as I said, I have looked for this opportunity. I have approached the Exim Bank of umpteen times. The last time was at the annual meeting of the bank in Lusaka. I've been to Abidjan, where they have their regional office. But I think the strategy of the bank, as far as financial institutions are concerned, must be re-examined if India must make an impact in financing the development in Africa. You cannot finance development without going through banks. And you can only do so effectively through private banks. Now, in Sierra Leone, for instance, we have foreign banks, we have regional banks, and we have Sierra Leonean banks. And as I said, Union Trust Bank is the only indigenous private bank there. We deal with the African Development Bank, we deal with the Islamic Development Bank, and we get direct links, direct access. I have just sourced about $6 million from the African Development Bank. I manage a fund from the Kuwait fund directly, not going through the government, not going everywhere. But my problem with the EIB, the India Exim Bank, is that as much as we have tried as a private bank to deal with them directly to access funds, it has been very difficult because we either have to go through government or we go through the regional bank, that is the ECOWAS bank. Now, that poses problems, serious problems. Serious problems because on the side of the regional bank, it is a regional bank, and we have about 16 ECOWAS countries with various stages of development, with various priorities and preferences. So for a bank like Union Trust Bank to access funds from the Exim Bank through the ECOWAS Bank, it takes a lot of time. And we have not been able to do so. Not been able to do so, not because we are unattractive. I believe if I can access funds from the African Development Bank directly, if I can access funds from ICD, which is the private sector of the Islamic Development Bank, if I can access funds from the Kuwait Fund directly, I think we are doing something good and we are attractive. So I'm sure we can meet the criteria which are set by the Exim Bank. Now, I'll just give you one or two examples where I think this must be re-examined. In Sierra Leone, the biggest private hospital is Indian, the Choitram Trust. This is an Indian farm that has been in Sierra Leone for over 100 years. And they've established a trust. And they established a hospital, which is the biggest referrals hospital, which is the biggest private hospital. They are my customers. And guess what? When I have to order drugs for them, I have to pay them through Standard Bank New York. Because, as you know, virtually all the big banks in the West have cut us all off. Either East Africa, Barclays sold everything away and don't want to do anything with Africa. They are correspondent banks. HSBC have written all of us off. I don't know because of the Panama Papers or whatever, but that's the problems which we face. So today, if I have to pay money to India, there is no direct link between a bank in Sierra Leone, a commercial bank in Sierra Leone, and an Indian bank. We have to break that and establish correspondent relationship with banks here. There are over 100 banks in this country, and we have to do that, but it is extremely difficult. I'll give you another example. The telephone company in Sierra Leone was Airtel. They were my customers. If I want to pay transfer money, wages for staff or equipment, I have to go through New York. There is no direct link here. So these are the two levels. One, the direct financial institutional links between banks in Africa, private banks, and I'm not saying it is all banks, but those who are attractive enough, and by the attractiveness means we're doing the right things. If I can be evaluated by the African Development Bank, if I could be evaluated by the IFC, if I could be evaluated and pass a test by the ICD, I could pass a test from an Indian bank, I'm sure. And I think we should establish those links. Secondly, I think going through the government, it also has its own drawbacks. There are many projects in Sierra Leone. Commerce, for instance, most of the funding that comes through PPP or IPP or whatever it is goes through the government. And it is not very easy to go through the government red tape. My government is very effective. Don't get me any wrong. I used to be in government for a very long time, and I think it's a very effective government. But it's only the red tape. And we, as I have turned a private sector for the last 20 years. So we in the private sector like to do things very, very fast. because it costs money. So I think we should, the Exim Bank should review its policy of funding development and industrialization in Africa through either a third party or through the government. I think that you look at financial institutions directly, particularly private bank, In Sierra Leone, you can go to our website and see it is strong, it is attractive by any means, and we can fund any project within Sierra Leone effectively. So I think I very much cherish this opportunity today to give my views as far as funding African infrastructure, funding African industrialization from India is concerned. We should revisit this policy and ensure that funds flow directly. And we should also make the create the opportunity where commercial banks have direct correspondent links with Indian banks, which enhance trade and promote all kinds of development. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kurama. May I now request Honorable Minister Shri Santosh Kumar Gangwarji to kindly make his answer. No, that lady's no. Ramchandra is finished. That lady is finished.
Shri Kuppu Swami ji, on dais, CEO ILFS, Shri Karunakar Ramchandra ji, Shri R.K. Gupta ji, just we are listening, Madam Tisolo, James Kuroma, dear friends. Actually, for the first time, when I am listening that there is a like such program, so only I can say in a start that it's indeed very encouraging to see that we have representation from such countries which have the highest potential to develop into engines of growth from the continent of Africa. I welcome all the thoughts shared by our some colleagues about this, and the governments of different countries which are here, they will also share their thoughts. From India's point of view, it is very important that these thoughts which resonate with ours at this point in time be translated into action without any transitory loss. This is an age where decision taken can within seconds be transformed into actual tangible action, and hence we must capture the moment in the real time. India has been most proactive with the foreign policy and especially with the focus towards the vision of South-South cooperation. I can say that from when this new government came, it is very proactive in this respect, and I have a chance to visit some places. As a result of this proactive policy in Africa, India's trade with Africa has increased 4 times in recent years. India's trade relation within Africa varied in terms of region and intensity over the year. The nature of trade between India and African countries also changed a lot, mostly on the positive side. With integrated Africa on the high 5 agendas, on top of our list of priority regional integration through various projects completed across sector would be most optimal means of achievement the goal with integration effort of not only but just on movement of goods and services, but also on mobility of citizens and investment. India aims to create the much needed layer of cohesiveness requires to ensure that the high five agendas reach the heights of success that has been intended. Our focus on creating synergies with ideas such as the Intersolar Alliance, a regional framework of cooperation across sector, is starting to be defined, and we hope to see many such projects coming up leading the action of citizens, especially the youth, into the front line of prosperity and success. For an effective trade, investment and development partnership, there need to be enough awareness among Indian investors about the diverse nature of African countries. In order to succeed, Indian companies must understand that each African country is different and has different needs and hopes. India's relationship with Africa is based on a common future with similar demographic and economic opportunities. We are completely ready to bridge any gap that may be there to ensure a smooth way of addressing economic situations. With increasing economic importance of the African continent, the geopolitical linkage between India and Africa are becoming even more necessary. Ensuring peace, security, and internal stability are the key to economic investment and growth. In that sense, Africa is no more a continent on the margin of Indian security interest, but very much a focus in the long-term strategic plan. India has had a long engagement with Africa in terms of peacekeeping. During the back in the UN operation of Congo 57 years ago, India currently deployed about 4,500 peacekeepers in several African countries like South Sudan and Congo. Indian peacekeeping mainly indicates its support for African steps for peace and security. The foremost on our mind is the upgradation of the India-African partnership to be a strategic dialogue level with some concern and ensure long-term cooperation in security and strategic matter such that sectors like maritime and port connectivity. India and Africa have a very old historic relationship. From our great leader Mahatma Gandhi and Honorable Shri Nelson Mandela, both are known to be their inspiration bondings. Gandhiji got inspiration of freedom from South Africa. So I can say that this is a very positive way. And on the dais there are two major persons are here. I personally know both of them, Mr. Gupta ji of Babcock and ILFS. Of both working, I know personally how they are working with great positiveness. And I think I can say that now there is a time to work with this new era where lot of fields for us. And I can say that we have got a very proper relation, both of them. With African countries, I think so that they all think that we are close each other and we are particularly brother and sisters each other. So I am very much happy to be here with you, and I can say it will open a dialogue and open a working spirit. And I can say that Honorable Prime Minister is very much enthusiastic in this sense how we can proceed with and do more and more favor with each other. So I congratulate all of you to be here, and I can say it's an era now where India is emerging as a good friend of these countries which we are earlier each other and working with sidelines. I can say कि by these words कि I hope that this summit will positively produce a good result and our working will be more and more starts each other. Thanking you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for the wonderful views that we expressed. Friends, I have the freedom to allow 4 questions. May I request you to give precedence to the African brethren and try to make it from one from each quadrant or something like that, as far as possible. Yeah, 4 questions. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself and then.
Thank you. I'm Caleb Dengo. I'm coming from Zimbabwe. We work with WAPCOS, so I'm quite happy that WAPCOS is here. Very quick questions. How have you dealt with the government's reluctance to PPPs? Initially, a discussion when they want a project to take place, they are quite happy, but when a partner comes, power moves from government to the private sector, and half the time the concession agreement is disturbed and it doesn't work. The second question is about project finance, which has been raised on that. Can Exim Bank particularly focus on appraising the projects instead of going through all the government layers? Sometimes it will allow a viable project to be financed irrespective of the country risk, because the project itself is viable, which allows the second point of twinning. How do you twin Indian companies and African companies to make a successful business? If this money, because an Indian businessman might find it taking too much risk to go and invest in Africa, but if this Exim Bank can support projects where there's twinning, that a company in India and a company in any part of Africa, they come together, then the project is financed, everyone is taking the risk. I think it would really be a way to go. Thank you.
Sir, I think you asked 3 questions in one. May I ask Karnakaran to field the first question?
Yeah, okay. Just by way of joke, this gray hair is not because I'm old, but because I'm in PPP. Okay. So, if you're ready to lose your hair and get it white, I'm sure you can make PPP succeed. Just to give you an example, we own 14,000 kilometers of roads in India. Globally, about 32,000. Okay, and that's a large number. But we started, as I said, in Gujarat with a 30-kilometer road, and it took 3 years to finally get the concession agreement signed. And I think the trick is to get a good partner whom the government trusts, and that's very important. If the government is going to be untrustworthy about the partner that it selects, I'm sorry, I don't think we will be able to proceed on the basis at all, because there has to be mutual trust if a PPP framework has to work. There is no other solution for a trust created between the partnerships, because the partnership it's not a 2-year partnership, it's not a 3-year partnership, it's probably a 30-year partnership. And if you look at one of our projects where we did a metro in Gurgaon, it's a 99-year concession. So the partnership is really long-term. What was lacking when we started this whole exercise was not the trust, actually. Indian banks were not used to financing infrastructure, okay, because when they finance a toothpaste factory, they can remove the machinery and sell it somewhere if the factory goes bust. But you can't take a road from a place and go and sell it somewhere else. So the security structure that a bank will require at the early stages are very critical to actually close out right in the beginning. We offered them actually the revenue streams. We also, in the initial phase, both Government of Gujarat and ourselves actually offered also additional support than what we are today offering on both government side as well as the private sector side. We offered stuff like a non-disposal undertaking that we would not get out of the project as long as the lenders were in place. We also provided them with comfort of a debt service cover to be available at least for the first 10 years of the project. And I think that trust that both of us had helped the private sector and the government sector to move forward. We quickly from one project, like I said, India today has 33,000 projects of PPPs. And I think that's basic. I want to reply to a question that my friend here raised. Because, I've been sitting for half an hour and, it seems to be exam bashing all the time, and I think you need to recognize that, while the forum may be appropriate for exam bashing, it's not, exam has its own condition. I don't know of any other exam across the world which funds private sector banks, And if you expect that Government of India and Exim Bank of India will first fund, will become the first of the block, I don't think that's going to happen. We don't have a private sector window in Exim Bank. The ADB has a private sector window. The African Development Bank has a private. You will have to go to a multilateral, which is how IFC will fund. So you will have to, I don't think you will get much of bilateral assistance when you want to fund a private sector window. I'm sorry to, I know you're the governor of the federal bank, but I think we need to be clear that Exim has its limitations, and by driving it home, it's not going to help the relationship. That's about what I have to say. I'm open for any questions that you may have or issues that you may want to raise with me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me that opportunity. My colleague there from Zimbabwe was just endorsing what I was saying. I mean, look, we are so far away from southern there, we are from the west there, but I think we are experiencing the same thing. And let me assure my colleague here that it's not exim bashing, it's an appeal. An appeal is different from bashing. And what we are saying, look, I have quite a, I've been so much in government that I have a lot of experiences. And I have one big experience when I was governor of the central bank. The government of India tried to do a big project, and it never worked. I went to the private sector. Recently, we had a project, a power project, which was going through the private sector. And the mechanics that take place, it hasn't worked. So really, if one project doesn't work, another project doesn't work, different sectors, let's look at another area. Let's look at another mechanism. I know Exim Bank doesn't have a private sector wing, but it is there to fund industrialization, help Africa to develop. And what better way to help Africa to develop than to go through what works? And this is all we are saying. You can have all the money. If you channel it through mechanisms that don't work, it doesn't make a difference. So we are appealing that for those of us who operate there and see what works, I have not seen one ECOWAS project, ECOWAS bank project that works in Sierra Leone, because Exim Bank funds us through ECOWAS Bank. And I have not seen a very laudable big project that has been funded from India, either Exim Bank or otherwise through PPP that has really worked. I am not saying they wouldn't work. I have not seen one, and I've been in government all my life, and I'm still there in the private sector. We are appealing that if we want to see what you guys are doing here, the private sector here moves this country. You can just see it. You sit down in Jet Airways, it's private. I mean, have you seen any African government airways that works properly? So let us be realistic. If you want to help us, and we really, really need your help to industrialize, to move forward, let us find mechanisms that work, not just to go through the same processes that really don't work. That's all we are saying. Thank you very much.
I think it's always good to hear different viewpoints, however differing and however practical or otherwise they might be. May I now request somebody from that corner? Yeah, this gentleman. Yeah, please. Sir. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Mon nom c'est Kalissi Apoyapo. Je suis le directeur général adjoint de l'Agence de gestion des routes de la Côte d'Ivoire. Et je voudrais poser ma question à celui qui a parlé de partenariat public-privé dans le secteur routier en Inde et qui a dit qu'il avait commencé par 3 km, 30 km et qui est maintenant à 14 000 km. Le défi du partenariat public-privé dans le secteur routier, c'est beaucoup plus le trafic et les tarifs. En Côte d'Ivoire, nous avons, dans la ville d'Abidjan, construit un pont, le 3e pont, qui est notre première histoire dans le secteur du partenariat public-privé. Malheureusement, nous avons pris plus de 15 ans pour achever ce projet, parce que nous avons commencé en 1998. En 1999, nous avons eu un coup d'État. En 2002, nous avons eu une guerre qui a coupé le pays en deux. Et lorsque tous ces événements sont terminés, nous avons pu inaugurer le projet en 2013. Donc toutes les études qui avaient été faites et les calculs qui avaient été faits pour fixer le tarif et le trafic se sont avérés impossibles à tenir, à tel point qu'à ce jour, le gouvernement est obligé de payer une forte somme pour compenser le manque à gagner de l'entreprise concessionnaire. Je voulais demander à celui qui est concessionnaire de 14 000 km en Inde, comment est garanti le tarif et le trafic en Inde. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. First, let me give you an example of how the government of India actually works on the PPP framework. You know, when we started the first 2 roads, there was no grant element or there was no subsidy element. It was a joint venture between the government of Gujarat and ILFS, and that's how we started the first toll road. And the government contribution was therefore to be a 50% partner in a project which we raised commercial resources for. Both of us transparently bid out every aspect of the project. We got a contractor, we got a feasibility study done, we got an O&M operator. Everything was transparently procured, and we followed guidelines which were set in because we had by that time got a World Bank line of credit for about $150 million, which was the long-term money which was available for this project. At that point of time, the road tolls were set based on the feasibility for the project. As you will see, and you know, I don't want to take too much time, but we've had experiences, okay? You know that the government of India or the Indian Republic exploded its first nuclear bomb in 2000. All multilaterals disappeared, and you know, we had to raise domestic resources to get those projects done during that period. And I think we got a lot of support from government to actually do and go forward on that basis. The first few toll roads did not have any framework for tolls. The government of India then set up a policy, and they decided that all roads would be charged the same toll rate irrespective of how much they cost. This is unlike what happens in China, where China fixes its toll rate depending on the capital cost. In India, the toll rate is set irrespective of what the cost of the project is. What you bid for, therefore, is a subsidy that you want on the project, a capital subsidy that you can bid for up to 40% of the project cost. And therefore, that's how viability is set for the project. And yeah, so wherever you travel in the country, if you travel 10 kilometers, you pay the same toll, irrespective of whether it's in the Himalayas or whether it is in the plains or whether it's in the easiest of territories. So the government of India actually fixes tolls right up front. There is no variation across the country. So that's number one. And the bidding parameter is the grant that you require. Now, what has happened over time is that because the traffic has increased, the government has actually found that people are willing to pay a premium to actually obtain these projects rather than take a grant. And actually, there are a lot of projects which are today going out on a premium basis where the private sector is willing to share the revenues collected on the project to actually win these projects. So So we have moved with time. And it's not that, the biggest problem that we face in most of these projects is, I think it's true also of Africa, for example, is projections. We really don't have too much of good data to project traffic. So it's very much a guesstimate rather than a scientific study to estimate traffic. And you win some and you lose some. And in our 17 to 18 years that we've been managing toll roads, I think we are breaking even. I wouldn't say we're making too much money, we're not making too much losses, but we are okay. And I think that's how we are at this point of time. Thank you.
Is that okay? Okay. Now, can I ask the last quadrant, anyone from there? Just 1 minute, 1 second. Okay. Sorry?
Get some question on the left side.
Yeah, last quadrant I said. If you have something from that side. None? Okay, please. I'll give the last one.
My name is Laurent Sommet. I work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF here. I was very much impressed by the experience in growing the road network. My question is quite simple. How did you factor in the natural capital issues as you are growing and developing the road network? Yeah, the ecological infrastructure to minimize any ecological damage. Thanks.
If you just shake hands with two persons on your right, you have Mr. Mayaram, okay? And and he can give you far better examples than I can offer you. But however, in all our projects, we have formulated at ILFS what we call an environment and social policy. And every project that we do has to pass that screening test of an environment and a social policy. It includes rehabilitation, it includes ecological damage, it includes all sorts of sustainability parameters that have to be addressed before actually a project gets bid for within the system. And I think that's how we manage to make sure that we cause the minimum amount of ecological damage. The last project that we just completed, and I think the Honorable Prime Minister inaugurated, was a 9-kilometer tunnel in Himalayas. And that's where the maximum number of ecological damage could have taken place, but actually we've done a fairly decent job. We've converted all the muck that we pulled out through the tunnel into a playground for a school just next to our tunnel site, and I think we've done some. And if you do sufficient work at the feasibility study, I think you will be far better placed when you start implementing those projects.
I personally knows the working of ILFS, and I can say what they are saying, that is correct. In my area, they built a road, and no complaint comes to me. Everywhere I saw that persons are coming and making complaints. But ILFS working is so good that they work on time, and I can say that they manage to rural persons how they can earn more and more money, and he allowed nearby road to ask him to come and do those works by which they can earn more and more. So I can say it's a private, or by private they are now their work is completed there. But pupils are praising them that they have done a very good work. Only this I can say.
Thank you, sir.
Hello everyone. It's been a fantastic learning experience. I'm Akash Bhavsar. I'm a co-founder of WaterQuest Hydro Resources, a Government of India recognized startup using artificial intelligence to locate groundwater sources between 300 to 800 meters of depth. What we do is, in terms of map, identify, drill, and manage water resources which are climate resilient and perennial. So my question is that, being an entrepreneur, and our team is very passionate about the subject of water and the issues which it's one of the major ailing issues in African nations as well. especially in areas with contaminated groundwater or drought-prone areas. So in those cases, what would be, such a distinguished panel from your experiences, what would be your advice to an entrepreneur who's willing to work in the African nations, especially in the infra in the sector like water or related sectors? So maybe top 5 or any set of advice which you would give us. Thanks.
Let me give you just one example. I live in Freetown, Sierra Leone, which you know Freetown is the capital. And we have a government agency for water. And I moved to my present resident, private resident, about 19 years ago. And I never had a connection from the Guma Valley Water, which is the company that provides water for this capital. About 2 weeks ago, I had an Indian company. 2 weeks ago. Completely Indian company that came and bored a hole, bore water. And believe me, I don't only have enough water for my entire household, but I also give water to my neighbors from that borehole, from an Indian company.
Every good thing must come to an end. We had a very lively question and answer session. I must thank Honorable Minister Gangwarji for having spared his time and been with us. I must also thank our African brethren for having come down all the way. In my closing remarks, I would just like to add a few points. One is, I'll speak from our own personal experience. I come from Shapoorji Pallonji Group, AFCONS, my group companies, and construction of infrastructure, and SP Infrastructure Capital is into PPP. Some of the most difficult roads in India have been done by companies, India-based companies like mine. Udhampur Road, and I mentioned Konkan Railway earlier. Therefore, India has a lot to give to Africa also. On the PPP front, the government of India has recognized the need for funding PPP projects in Africa wherever there are viable ones, and therefore, the latest guidelines on lines of credit include a provision for funding viability gaps for projects to be taken up on PPP basis in Africa. The right way, if you ask me, is to choose the right projects. My own chairman says that in the entire length of last 10 years, we took up 2 projects. One was the toll project, Trichy Tollway, which we sold at a profit, which again the buyers sold at a much higher profit again. The other, an annuity one, which was completed ahead of schedule, 6 months in mountainous territory, Jammu Udhampur. The right choice of projects is what matters where you succeed to start with. You may, of course, later expand to other projects also. And as I mentioned, the viability gap funding having been taken under the coverage of lines of credit, it would be that much easier for African nations to seek Government of India funding for projects which are taken up by Indian companies under PPP. I also would like to add that regional integration is very significant. If you want to integrate economies and get the best out of the material wealth that your nations possess, the correct choice would be to go in for infrastructure projects that connect nations. In the West African region, Burkina Faso, Niger, etc., have huge mineral wealth. For them to evacuate that, it would require a railway network. So also, of course, from Zimbabwe, in the southern side. So what Ghana had recently done is to go in for the Tema Akosombo Railway project, which again our company has taken up, a $400 million railway project, which will have the capability of evacuating material from landlocked countries and also transport cement and other facilities from the port in Ghana to those landlocked countries. So the correct choice of project determines successes of nations in infrastructure forays. That said, I must thank you all for giving us a patient hearing. I do hope it has been a fruitful session. Thank you very much.